Alrighty, guys. So today I will. You'll notice the notes say that it is day 10. All that's true. This is PowerPoint 9. All that's true. However, you'll notice that it says it is for the shoulder, elbow, and wrist. I put the wrist stuff in the PowerPoint in case you guys want to take a look at it, but it's not something that you're ever tested on. And considering how long it's going to take us to get through the shoulder and elbow, we won't actually be covering the wrist stuff today. It's not in your textbook. It's not like, that list in the appendix with all the list of muscles. They don't actually have any of the wrist stuff in there. So we don't have like our isolated functions for the wrist area. We're really just going to be in shoulders and elbows today. Because like, honestly, if your client's having like wrist problems, there's a couple things that we can do for them. But for the most part, honestly, like that's physical therapist territory. It's a very small, very complicated joint. But let's take a look at the anatomic structures before we dive into some of the injuries and stuff today. Let's take a look at some of the anatomic structures that we're going to be talking about. This PowerPoint is full of info. So you can see this is the front and the back of the shoulder girdle. So one thing that sometimes confuses people, in the same way that we were talking about the hips last time, right? We talked about how you have your pelvis that's interacting with your sacrum and your spine. That's your pelvic girdle. And it's this strong base of support that your leg bones can like sort of attach onto. And so where the leg bone, your femur, attaches to the pelvis, the pelvic girdle, we call that the hip joint. The same arrangement is here in the shoulder. So there is actually two separate structures we got to talk about here. There's the shoulder girdle, which is your collarbone and scapula. And then there's the shoulder joint, which is your scapula and your humerus here. Similar to how you had your pelvis was your pelvic girdle, and then your pelvis plus your femur was your hip joint. So same arrangement here. So clavicle, that's collarbone, plus scapula, that's shoulder blade. That's the girdle. And then it is the base of support from which the shoulder joint, which is your humerus there, your upper arm, is sort of able to be a ball and socket. So we're going to be looking at that today. We'll work our way down and take a look at the elbow here, which is kind of cool. It's a hinge joint in the elbow proper, very similar to your knee joint. But then it's also got this second little bone here, your radius and your ulna, which allow for rotational movements, pronation and supination. So that's kind of cool. And then we do see, if we are just talking about the wrist really briefly, we do know we've got our radius and ulna coming down here, just like we had our tibia and fibula coming down at the ankle. And then we had all of our tarsals in the feet, the tarsals in the ankle. Well, these are going to be called your carpals. In the wrist, so very similar arrangement there. Then in the feet, we had the metatarsals, so these are going to be your metacarpals here in the hand, and then phalanges is the name for the digits, right? So that's kind of cool, right? We definitely see like a similar arrangement. I always think that this PowerPoint is like the sequel to the ankle, the knee, and the hip, which is why it's kind of at the end of everything, right? We're going to see some serious similarities there, but they are, ever so slightly different. So again, the shoulder girdle, you can see here, it is made up of, this whole section here. You can see this is the top of your sternum. It is actually technically a separate bone from your sternum, but most people just call this kind of part of it. But this is called your manubrium. It kind of looks like a Superman shield that lives like right here. And it's where your two collarbones attach. So from there, it runs out like this. And so, your collarbone is attached at the manubrium. By the way, this little joint right here, this is called your your anterior sternoclavicular joint. This is the only bone-on-bone contact that you have that holds your entire freaking arm on, which is kind of crazy, right? You think about like how much sort of muscle and stuff is here, and we exert like lots of force, doing pull-ups and shoulder presses and all this like kind of crazy stuff. But the only like bone-on-bone connection you've got is like your sternum kind of coming across and grabbing with this little tiny joint right here. So that works its way across. So there's your collarbone, and then you can see that this is what's called your AC joint. That's your acromioclavicular joint, which is super freaking complicated to say. By the way, fun fact about today's lesson, this was my interview. This was the PowerPoint they sent me when I interviewed to work at Sochi. And let me tell you, when you are nervous for an interview and you have to say acromioclavicular joint a bunch, that is not a good look. My first interview was very bad. But luckily they were desperate, so I got a second chance. I came back in much more confident the second time. So yeah, that was that's the AC joint there. And the reason it's called that is, again, your collarbone is your clavicle, so that's where we get the term clavicular. And then you'll actually see, we'll take a look at the back of the scapula here in just a little bit. But do you see how like there's this bone that kind of hooks out from behind the scapula and it kind of comes around, like it kind of hooks around like this? That is what's called your acromion process. It's got this little knob right here. And it literally, like, this is such a weird bone, but you get the kind of triangular shape here. And then on the back, starting on this ridge here, it rises out and then it hooks around and comes to the front. And so that little hook coming from the front is the acromion process. And so the acromion and the clavicle, that's the AC or acromioclavicular joint. And the only reason we're spending any time talking about that right now is, here's the thing. When you move your shoulder joint, which is we would have right here, actually, see this little like, indentation here, that is your, what's called your glenoid cavity. It's an example of like a fossa. It's like a really deep sort of like indentation there. And that's where the ball and socket shoulder joint actually sits. So when you move your shoulder joint, you can understand how like your scapula, your clavicle, all of it has to also move. And so like this is the girdle here, but the shoulder joint, when it moves through its range of motion, absolutely affects your overall scapula. So these pieces move as a unit. And that's why this is kind of important to look at them separately so we can understand how they affect one another. And so, like I said, the shoulder girdle is the collarbone and scapula. And then the shoulder joint, that's your humerus and your scapula. And so this is the most mobile joint in your body. It is a ball and socket joint. Now, what's great about that, again, is that we have lots of mobility. But like I've said plenty of times in the past, with increased mobility comes decreased stability, which is why this is also, when it comes to when it comes to dislocations, this is the most common one that we're going to run into. Yeah, you can have hip dislocations. Yeah, you can dislocate anything really, or subplex it. But like, this is the one that often happens in, just because it has such a little amount of surface area, bone on bone contact, and so it's very easy to sort of dislocate this. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to make sure that we have proper posture, because without it, we're likely to get injured. But you can see that's going to move through this whole like, gliding and sliding action here. It can also do rotation. This can literally do every type of motion that we have, which is really, really awesome. But, definitely needs to be taken care of properly. And then, like I said, we're going to talk about the elbow tonight. The elbow, there's sort of two joints that we're going to talk about here. It is the articulation between like the actual elbow itself, which is the humerus coming down here, and then this is your ulna. That's the kind of bladed part of your forearm here, and it comes in and they kind of insert into one another. So really, the only thing that can happen at this joint, you can even see the shape of it there, is hinging, right? But we need to be able to like pronate and supinate, and that's where luckily having a second bone that is not attached to the humerus, that just kind of inserts on there, allows us to kind of have that rotational movement. We can kind of spin it around like this. And that's sort of what's going on there. Have you guys seen this? I wonder if I can find it. Have you guys seen this TikTok thing where it's like flip your hand over without moving your wrist? Let's see if I can find this. Flip hand over without moving. Yeah. Here we go. This is about 30 seconds. This is kind of funny. So here's the thing. Like, he's going to do this whole thing. He's going to try to, no doing this. So what he does is going to do it, his elbow, and this, and then he goes straight, and then he comes back up again and down. And there we go, right? He flipped his wrist over. Not really. What he actually did, it definitely looks like it, but all he did was, instead of doing this, he went like this.
imagine if we couldn't move our wrist. That's what we have to do to like try to drink a cup and like everything.
Exactly. That's exactly what I brought up. Yeah. You just nailed it. Imagine, right? Like, it'd be such a pain in the rear. Yeah. So that is one of the coolest. I actually really love this joint. I think it's a really kind of fun, unique one. It's not that unique because we got the same arrangement in the ankle, but like, I don't know. I just think the forearm is so cool. There's another bone that I broke as a child, by the way.
Broke your forearm.
What's that?
Which bone did you break though?
So I broke it just at the end here. So I broke, I tore some of the fascia that holds these two together right down here. And then I broke the ulna on this side right over here.
That's closer to your wrist, no?
Yeah.
That's the wrist side. Wow.
Yep. Yeah. And then this is like the major contact wrist side, but this is the side that kind of gave when it broke. It just like a little tiny fracture at the very end. I think I may have had like a crack in here too. I'm not sure, but yeah, fell off a slide.
Damn.
Yeah. Jumping backwards like a dummy. My poor parents, man. So here's actually, you can kind of see, here's your wrist, by the way. Those are all those carpals I talked about. By the way, if you ever hear of like, are we going to talk about carpal tunnel syndrome? No, we're not. You'll sometimes see like carpal tunnel syndrome. If you've ever heard of that, that's a kind of interesting. That's actually not like a traditional like injury. Like nothing gets like, it's not like you smacked something and injured it, and that's what caused carpal tunnel. It's like not like a contact injury or anything like that. If you actually look at it, carpal tunnel syndrome is actually really similar. Remember when I was telling you guys about sciatica and how your piriformis can pinch that nerve, so then the pain runs down your leg, right? You have what's called your median nerve, which is this nerve that runs down your wrist under there. See, these are all pictures of the surgery here, but you can see this nerve runs down your wrist and then it kind of branches out to your hand there. And you've got this thick connective tissue band right here. And if that gets like overly tightened, it can start pressing down. And that's a hard one to fix, through just like mobility drills and things like that. I mean, if you look at how it's running, it's like we just don't have a lot of movement that we can do to kind of work that around. And that's why like surgery is so common. What they'll do is they'll just go in there and they just kind of shave some of that connective tissue down, and just sort of expand it and kind of pull it apart. And then it's, it's a little bit.
Can that tissue like from boxing, you could get injured?
Well, yeah, I would say sure. I don't know, actually. I actually can't answer that. I'm not 100% certain if carpal tunnel is more common in boxers or not.
Yeah.
I know certain types of like hand injuries are, like osteoarthritis for sure.
What I think I have that, bro. I can't. It hurts so bad all the time, and it hurts. And then when I grab things, they cramp up like super fast.
Really?
And then sometimes I can't like let go. Yeah.
I also might be like trigger finger.
Okay.
So, which I know sounds like you're.
Yeah.
I think it's what they call it because it actually. I think they call it trigger finger because it actually kind of gets stuck in this. It doesn't.
Stuck. Yeah, my hands get stuck, dude.
Yeah, you should. If you can.
Yeah.
If you can. Weirdly enough, I think of a strongman when I think of like one of the best demos for this. But Brian Shaw has a really good video about this. But he'll take like, not hand size, hand. Yeah, so he's got a really great grip little tutorial here. One of the things that he does, and you could do this, is just go get like a 15-20 pound bag of rice,
Okay. Oh,
and
just play with the rice, huh?
yeah, and so what you do is here, and screen. All right, look at that Brian Shaw video. That video is great, but it's basically this. You basically dive your hands in and you open them and then you kind of close them. Like you just
Okay.
work like this.
Yeah.
And that has been shown to be kind of helpful for grip strength, but it's also like they'll use this in therapy sometimes.
Okay, yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah. Or even silly putty. Actually, that's like the new thing. Like it used to be like stress balls, and
Yeah.
now in to come back from surgery, they're giving people like silly putty.
Oh, I remember that stuff.
Yeah,
that's the stuff that you put on the newspaper and then pick it up and it has the picture on
exactly.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because like a ball, you kind of just squeeze it the same every time, but with silly putty, you can like roll.
Yeah, or Play-Doh too, no?
Yeah, I think I would be cautious with Play-Doh because I think it dries out, and I think that's the whole appeal of silly putty.
Okay. Yeah, more rubbery.
Yeah, but maybe I don't know. We're starting to get out of my lines.
Sorry, bro.
No, we're good. It's like we're gonna start getting to I don't know answers. All right, so let's look at our injuries. So here's one of the big ones. Shoulder pain in general. And this is why it's so big. I mean, like, affects about 1/5 of the population. It is a general ache or pain of the shoulder. So because of that, it's like, okay, well, that's obviously going to be a large percentage of the population because it's encompassing a lot of different types of injuries. But it's any pain in the glenohumeral joint or the scapula. So even if you get like a little bit of like pain right here at that, that AC joint, the acromioclavicular, right? Which actually, sorry, that's over here. This is your SC joint. SC is the sternoclavicular, it's the sternum plus clavicle, AC joints over here. But pain in either of those actually classifies under shoulder pain, which we generally think of as over here. But again, we've got the shoulder girdle in addition to the shoulder joint. And yeah, the biggest one, the most common one is going to be shoulder impingement. We'll talk about that here in its own right here, right? So we can see shoulder impingement. I'll come back to the elbow one in just a second, but this is where you've got a lot of connective tissue. Like until now, we've been looking at the bones, but if we look at like what's going on internally, right? You've got all this connective tissue that is coming up and over this bone here, right? Like, look at this. It has to wrap around because it's got to pull like this, it's got to wrap around and grab here so that it can pull. And so but it has to also be under the collarbone there, right? And so because there's a lot of like hard tissue here and a lot of soft tissue here, and you can see like all this like little pieces of connective tissue, what will often happen is it will get pinched, which is one, when you hear the word impinge, think impinged, because that is really what's happening, particularly in this muscle right here called your supraspinatus. We'll talk about why it's called that in just a moment, but it is superior to the spine of the scapula is where it gets its name, but we'll talk more about, we'll see it in just a little bit, but it runs over top and it grabs right here. And so it's helping abduct the arm. I know we think of our anterior deltoid as primarily responsible for that. And make no mistake, it is the bigger of the muscles and it is doing most of the work. But this is trying to help there because it's a rotational movement, right? We don't just want to grab from one side. Imagine trying to grab, carry a couch with one arm, right? You need to have like that stability on both ends. So we have this supraspinatus muscle working with those deltoid muscles. But if this material, like if you just lose space here, and then all of a sudden this soft tissue starts getting pinched in between this little arch right here, it rubs and you get the clicking and all these like problems that we have in our shoulders, right? Now, how the heck does it get that way? Same way everything else does, right? Like we spend all day in a certain posture that maybe we're not supposed to be in, and our muscles get a little bit overactive. They start moving the way they're not supposed to. And that's how we kind of end up with that shoulder pain. And there is bursa there too, by the way. You can see like this is one of those little fluid filled sacs like we saw on the knee, that bursa, which is there to kind of help with that rubbing sensation. But again, that does also mean there's just kind of more stuff shoved into that area. And the more stuff there is, obviously the lack of space there's going to be. So that's shoulder impingement. That's the most common shoulder injury on shoulder pain that we're going to run into. Obviously,
does that also, sorry. Does that also, because people have that also loses like restriction on lifting, like lateral lateral movements?
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Like me?
Sure,
So
yeah.
like, so this is my left one, good one, right? You see how
Yeah,
it's 90-degree, right?
right.
Perfectly aligned.
Mhm.
Look at this one. I
Yeah,
can't go any further up. It's stuck. Like I
sure.
need someone to just
Yeah.
Like,
like
So
I don't know how I don't know where to go for that though.
totally. So it's most likely it's from your scapula is kind of dumping forward a little bit, and so
Yeah.
that connective tissue is getting pinched, right? So here's, I mean, everybody can actually get to that point. Like me or Thomas, everybody, you can here roll your shoulders forward like this right now, kind of like,
yeah.
and now try to raise your arms as far over your head as you can.
Uh,
That's about it, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Should get all the way up here. Should be able to get behind my ears, you know? But like that's what happens, right? Like it needs to be at the right angle. So Eddie, what is really going on? I can even show you like, whoa, closed my PowerPoint.
Shit.
Missed. This is why I don't play shooter games. Damn it. Right here. So you can actually see this little notch right there.
Yeah.
If this comes too far this way, that notch starts grinding over here.
Ooh.
And just can't do it. You're hitting bone on bone, you know, like,
Yeah.
like I can't, you know, can't push this hand any further this way, this is in the way, you know, like,
That's what's happening.
yeah, so that's the grinding action there. That's the pinching sensation. So, you know, that involves like, you know, getting back into alignment. But sometimes, so if you roll your shoulders here, that might help. You might find that it's easier, but it's not just about coming backwards. It's also about getting the right tilt. So
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
the difference between just going back and tilting.
Hmm.
That's one of the things we're going to look at today. We're going to look at like the tilting that our scapula often makes.
And what makes it worse too is like when I have like really tightness here on the chest or even on the trap along with the lat. So when all that's like tight, it makes it even worse.
Yep. So that, you know, the reason you're describing the tightness right here, we're going to see the pec minor today. It lives
Right.
underneath your major pec muscle, but it grabs the scapula on the front and tilts it. That's what it literally grabs it and pulls it from here. It does do this. It does swing it around the front, but it also tilts it because it's pulling from the top. So because it pulls from the top, you know, it brings it forward, but it's kind of, you know, kind of like this.
You gotcha.
So yeah, we'll see it in just a moment.
For sure.
But yeah, that's a big one. It's a really big one. You know, what are there's 3 of us and yeah, 4 of us in this call, so 25% of our population. Very common. That is how data gets misconstrued, but there we go. All right, next one we got rotator cuff. Rotator cuff injuries, very, very common here. If you've ever torn one of these, it's so funny because a lot of times it can be something traumatic. You know, it can be like an injury or, you know, while like you're trying to grab something or stabilize something. And then sometimes it could literally just be like, I had a client describe this to me. They're like, yeah, years ago, you know, before we had met and stuff, they were like, yeah, I was just reaching back, you know, I was driving and then I like parked and my jacket was in the back seat and they just reached back like this and they were just trying to get, it was just out of reach and tore the rotator cuff.
Oh my God.
You know, yeah, just in the house, you know, or not in the house, but in the car, you know, like, so this is like, there's a lot of different versions of this. It's strains or tears, you know, problems of the rotator cuff. And the rotator cuff, you know, you want to think of it as like muscles that are kind of attaching on both sides so that they can, one can pull this way and one can pull this way. And so that takes my humerus and, you know, rotates it like this. Remember I said the guy in the video, he was doing this, right? Like, that's he's using his rotator cuff there. Doesn't look like it because it kind of it's far away, but that's what we're doing, right? So most of the time, what happens is because you can see how many muscles are tied into the front of the humerus here, those are the ones that's how we usually end up. And we also just live in a world where we're looking forward, we're typing forward, you know, we're doing everything in the sort of anterior way. And so we're getting this like kind of rounding sensation here. And so those muscles definitely get very tight and very overactive. So we're working on externally rotating that because we do way too much internal rotation. We also do, like I said, too much scapular tilting. We do too much scapular protraction. So those are going to be our 3 kind of big bads today. Like, you know, I know there's not a storyline to kinesiology, but I'm always like, those are our 3 villains for the day, right? too much internal rotation and not enough external, too much protraction instead of retraction, and too much anterior tilting instead of like, I guess, neutral or posterior tilting.
Also, like doing a lot of pushing doesn't even help it. Help out
No,
the.
unfortunately, it makes it worse.
It
Yeah.
makes it worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like usually my routine is like push, pull, shoulders, then arms. So it's like definitely a lot of pushing in those 3 days, I guess I
That's the
could say.
one thing about calisthenics. Calisthenics does a pretty good job of balancing out like upper back stuff. Like there's a lot of pulling in calisthenics, which I like.
Mhm.
But it doesn't have a lot of transverse movement, unfortunately. It doesn't
Yeah.
have a lot of like rotation, just in nature of like, what you have access to. Just like we don't see a lot of frontal plane movements, like
Mhm.
that's like, it's somewhat of a rare, there's just not as many of those types of things in the gym.
Yeah.
So those are usually where we have the most problems because it's just, we're not as practiced.
Yeah.
Then we got subplexions, aka dislocations. You can see here, this is a subplexed shoulder, where basically, popped right out of place. And the real problem there is oftentimes they can kind of pop it right back into place, but sometimes surgery will be required because if you look at your shoulder, if you look at all the connective tissue surrounding your shoulder joint, again, it's a ball and socket joint. So because of that, it is absolutely covered in ligaments, so those can often get torn as the bone's sort of working its way out. Actually, there's a really great picture.
Jeez.
See all that there. Right? Yeah, it's a real pain. And so we call that the shoulder capsule sometimes, but basically all that kind of connective tissue just wasn't strong enough to kind of hold it in the joint. And so then when it moved out, it kind of tore some of that as well. But a lot of times they can just kind of pop it back into place. I know I'm sure you guys have seen movies where people are like, they'll slam their shoulder back into place or they'll jerk it. That is totally not how you do it. But it doesn't make a good movie. I think usually the move is like something like this. They just kind of bring it across here and then they kind of pull away as they kind of go like this. And then as soon as they get to the top, it kind of just like slides back down. But that's sort of the trick. I had a client, it was so sad. I had to go with her to the ER.
Oh no.
Yeah, not the ER. I had to go to urgent care, but same thing in this case. She was an older lady. Her name was Betty White, actually, not that Betty White, but her name was Betty White. And she was trying to show, I think it was, she wanted to show me something on her phone. She was around the front and she tried to come around and we had these like smooth concrete floors, kind of like Costco,
Yeah.
And she like tried to come around and she didn't have her shoes on. So she slipped on her socks and just hit the pavement really, really hard. And so I was the trainer on duty. So I was like, I took her down to urgent care and she had dislocated her shoulder. And so they had to like pop it back into place. It was such a bummer. She made a full recovery. I mean, she was surrounded by personal trainers. So, like we all stayed in touch with her and stuff, but what a bummer.
Yeah.
By the way, true story, I've never in my life met any man, woman, or child who hated vegetables the way Betty White did.
Oh man.
That woman, it was like a little kid. I was like, you gotta eat something green.
Jeez. I'm pretty sure I'm
God,
gonna have clients like that.
100%. Trust me.
And they
All
could
right.
always drink their greens though, right?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, it's not quite the same, but if I will take what I can get, yes. Same thing with like vitamins, It's like it's not the same, but I will take what I can get.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see here I listed this as elbow epicondylitis.
Oh, I get those a lot.
What's that?
I get those a lot.
Tennis elbow.
Yeah.
So
It's like on this side, right?
well, yeah.
On
So
the
that's the thing,
outside?
right? So tennis elbow is the lateral epicondylitis, and then golfer's elbow is medial.
Oh.
So again, picture anatomic position. I know we haven't come back to this in a while, but like anatomic position, right? This is the medial side and this is the lateral side. So if you're getting pain on the outer part of your elbow, that's tennis elbow. Tennis elbow. And then medial side right here, that's golfer's elbow. Can you tell I hate both those sports? Not my areas. But yeah, so you can see the fascia here. It's honestly a tennis elbow. If I'm using an analogy for like an injury that we've already talked about, it's like runner's knee. It's just like a tight IT band rubbing on the outside of the knee. Same exact thing. And then golfer's elbow is on the inside. That's also the same as IT band syndrome, except that it's medial instead of lateral. But yeah, that one is where you'll get these little tiny, tiny micro tears and little bits of inflammation and stuff. I did have carpal tunnel in here. I just didn't put it in the notes. Carpal tunnel syndrome, right? The median nerve starts getting pinched by that connective tissue band. So they'll go in there and stretch that band out. Okay, so one more time, going through the bones here. So the big ones we're going to end up talking about today is we are going to see your shoulder girdle again, right? That's the collarbone interacting with the sternum. That's why this is called your sternoclavicular joint, because it's the sternum clavicle. And then up here, you're gonna see this weird shaped bone, your scapula, with this little ridge on the back that hooks around. And that's your acromion process. Remember, a process is any projection. This is the most projected process in your freaking body. It's just like a hook, it looks like a freaking highway circling around. But it goes from there to there. And so the clavicle comes over and it attaches that. And there's a little bit of like extra connective tissue here. You can see like, to make sure this all like has a little bit of extra stability. But like, that's the big joint that we'll see here. And this is another, like, you'll see AC dislocations or AC problems. I think Hector said he has that. But you'll see like sometimes people can like pop their collarbone around. That's what, or maybe it wasn't one of you guys, right? Like, yeah. But yeah, that's a big one right there. So there we go. There's our kind of collarbone. And then you will also see, by the way, this weird hook right here on the front of the scapula. See this like kind of weird projection there? It looks like a tail was developing out of our shoulder blade, but that is your coracoid process. That's a really big one. That is actually where your pec minor is attaching. So we're going to see there's a little bit of a difference between where your two pectoralis muscles, they both originate here on the center, like on your breastbone and stuff, on your sternum, but they both grab very different spots. And they are both called pec muscles. So we kind of think they're really similar to one another, but they actually are they do very, very different things. This is moving the scapula. That's your pec minor. The other one attaches to your humerus. It actually attaches over here. So it moves your arm. So there's a big difference there. And then we've got your shoulder joint, which is like right here, where again, like the glenoid cavity, which is a big cavity and a big empty space, inserts that ball and socket joint that we always talk about, the actual humerus. That's why it's not just, sometimes they call it glenoid cavity, sometimes they call it glenoid fossa, or sometimes they'll just call it the glenohumeral joint, which is what I like to call it, because it's where the cavity is interacting with the humerus bone, So those are those areas right there, right? You can see those things. And then there is one more joint we haven't really talked about. This is kind of a fun one. You have what's called your scapulothoracic joint. So if this bone is your scapula and your upper back area is your thoracic spine, the scapulothoracic joint, and you can't really seem to do this, but like if I were to try to like dig my hand between like my upper back muscles and my scapula there, that's the scapulothoracic joint. And it's like not really a joint, at least not in the way that we really talk about. Like if a joint is two bones coming together. And so it's like, okay, well, my scapula is coming together with like all of the bones of my, back there on my spine and ribs. But like, it's not a synovial joint, because there's no synovial cavity there. There's no connective tissue even there, which is kind of crazy, right? And so it's literally where your scapula is interacting with all the ribs and the spine back here. It's just kind of gliding around this whole area, kind of living just above it, a little bit of space, so they can kind of slide around like this. but there's no connective tissue. If there was, then it wouldn't be able to come around the body, right? Like if I had connected tissue, attached this to this, it wouldn't be able to move around the body because connective tissue is not mobile enough. But you know what is super mobile is muscles. Muscles, they can contract, they can relax, they can contract, they can relax, right? They can move in both those directions. That's why this is technically a joint, but not really in the way that we tend to think about it. It doesn't have any ligaments. It just has muscles that are kind of run and attach the whole thing. And that's what allows it to have a range of motion. So that's your scapulothoracic joint. By the way, remember earlier I mentioned that ridge? And then I mentioned how it hooks around. There's the backside of that hook. Okay. You can see earlier. Weird, right? It's a weird looking bone.
Isn't that sitting like right beneath your traps?
Yeah, so your traps would run from up here and they would grab this whole ridge right here.
So that's why you would feel like a bone right at the bottom, like
Yep.
little. Is that it?
Yeah. If you so you'll feel the top part, right?
Yeah.
If you just go behind it, just barely
Behind it.
you'll
Yeah,
feel
I
a
feel
second
it.
ridge. Yeah.
Yeah.
That second ridge is part of it. So it hooks
Oh.
around, hooks around, and then comes to the front there. So yeah, kind of fun stuff. It's the shoulder joint's a cool, unique structure. And then there's the actual shoulder joint. Like I said, there's all the connective tissue surrounding it, right? Ball and socket joint interacting with that glenoid cavity. The elbow, you can see, kind of looks very similar to like how our femur comes down. Doesn't have quite the same like condyles. There's not, there's the meniscuses that you see in your knee. We don't need that much padding in our elbow comparatively. So you don't see quite the same connective tissue here, but you definitely see the same arrangement, like one bone, two bones, right? So this is your humerus. That's your upper arm, right? And then you've got your ulna, which is on the outside. That's what you can feel underneath the elbow there, right? That's the, as it sort of hooks around. And then you've got your radius, which is on the other side, right? So your radius is the one that kind of spins around. So if I can drag my radius over here and I can drag it back this way, and that creates that pronation, supination action. So the elbow joint proper is the humerus interacting with the ulna, right? So that's why we call it the humero-ulnar articulation, which is very hard to say. But that's the elbow joint, which is very easy to say. And then you've got the humero-radial one, and that's this joint right here, again, where the radius is kind of spinning. Oh, shoot, it's doing the yellow thing. I don't think it's going to keep doing that. Sorry, these PowerPoint slides used to do this back in the day. I can just scroll down and it goes away if I do this. So yeah, so those are those joints. And then there is like I said, like there's the humero-ulnar joint. There's actually two of them. I'm sorry, radio-ulnar joint. There's two of those where your radius is interacting with your ulna. It does that twice, right? Once up top at the elbow and once down below. Similar again to the way that the tibia and the fibula interacted twice, right? Once up top and once down below. So there's the superior one or the proximal one, and then there's the inferior one / distal one. But again, like one's taking place at the elbow and one's taking place at the wrist. Then we got all the little tiny joints of the wrist, your radius, your carpals, and things like that. You've got your radiocarpal joint, and you've got your ulnar carpals, right? Which we would call it just like your scaphoid, but like this whole area right here, it's kind of fun. This whole thing doesn't articulate quite the same way. The joint cavity is really unique. That's why they sometimes call this a false joint. But that's that whole area right in there. But like I said, we're not gonna spend a ton of time on wrist stuff today. Any questions on so far? How you guys feel about the bones so far?
Following it little by little.
Little by little. All right, I'll take that.
I actually love this topic just because might resolve my
personal,
problem.
right?
And yeah, and on top of that, like I'm able to help because I know a lot of people have that issue too. So it's like you said, like most of the population has it.
Yep.
It's
1 in
very
5.
important. Yeah.
All right, well, let's dive in, guys. We got a lot of muscles to get through today. So first one, we did kind of talk about this a little bit on Friday, because this does do, you can see all this fascia coming down. This is your lats, and there's all this like fascia down here. This is called your thoracolumbar fascia. And that's like the fascia that kind of surrounds the thoracic portion of your spine and the lumbar portion. It's connected to your lats. Your lats kind of build out from that fascia. And so like, because of that, when your lats contract, it actually can affect your pelvis. And this is what's kind of weird about that. You're like, wait, the lats are totally like an arm thing. And they absolutely are. But because they do connect, right, with the pelvis there is definitely, you can see some movement in the pelvis. So one of the things, you guys know that eventually we're going to move into talking a whole bunch about the overhead squat. Thomas, you definitely have talked about this before, but if you look at the overhead squat compensations, let's take a look at NASM here because they got a good picture on this. If you look at like these muscles, let me see if this is the high quality one. Ooh, it's not super great, but you can see if we look, low back arch, right? Remember low back arch, we talked about how that's often caused by the hip flexors, right? And so we know it's the hip flexor complex, that's your TFL, your rectus femoris, your psoas. We know it's the erector spinae because that also erects the spine, so that makes sense, right? But then we see the lats here. And people see that and they're like, what? These things are making my back arch? And it's like, yeah, because here's the thing. Like, imagine somebody, like, I'm going to pull this off. Share here real quick so you can see me a little bit better. So imagine if I go like this, right? I got a neutral pelvis right now. And then as I take my arms up, what if my lats are really, really tight and they don't want to stretch out any further? They get here and they don't want to stretch out. But you told me, I'm your client, and you told me, hey, get your arms all the way up, right? So then what I do is I just arch my back like this. Now my lat can stay in sort of a shortened position. It can stay contracted because it's overactive. It doesn't want to stretch, right? It can stay like that. And instead, it just compensates somewhere else. And that's why the arms fall forward is actually on our list when it comes to an anterior pelvic tilt. And people are always kind of surprised by that because they don't think you don't think of your lats when you think of your pelvis, you know? So if that was the case, if I had a client who has this really bad anterior pelvic tilt, right? And I'm making them do, you know, the overhead squat. One of the things I need to do is go, oh, okay, I'm seeing an anterior pelvic tilt during your squat. Now I, as the trainer, need to determine, is that because of the hip flexors or is it because of the lats? So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to say, all right, so you did the overhead squat. I can see a little bit of anterior pelvic tilt. Do me a favor, do that squat again, but just take your arms down here at your sides and go like this, and then give me that squat. Now, if I do this and they still just like super, you guys know me, I'm really bad at showing an anterior tilt. But like if they still have this like major arch, then by taking the stretch away on the lats, it made no dent. It didn't affect it at all. Therefore, the lats have nothing to do with the tilt. But if I have them go like this, and then all of a sudden their squat looks freaking perfect, it's like, oh, it's your hip flexors aren't pulling down. It's your lats. When I took the lat stretch away, your squat got better. That shows me that the lats are what's tight. Just like, you know, if I had a client who, you know, good Lord, they lean forward excessively. You know, a lot of times that's the hips pulling down, but it's also oftentimes the calves. So how do I tell if it's the hips or the calves? I take the stretch away from one of them. So if I can elevate their heels, put their heels on plates, and then all of a sudden their squat looks perfect, okay, I know it's the calves. I took the stretch away from the calves and your squat got better. Therefore, the calves are the big bad guy here. But they still, like, I put their heels up and they still just like lean forward and it had no effect. And it's like, oh, okay, so it's your hips that are pulling you down. So there's a little bit of a difference. That's where our compensations we have to sort of modify our assessment sometimes when it doesn't give us, you know, a super clear answer. So the lats are in charge of 3 things. This is, by the way, why this muscle gets so overactive. Number 1, it's huge. Number 2, it's got a lot of connective tissue. But number three, and probably most importantly, is it just does a lot of stuff. The more stuff a muscle does, the more likely it is to get overactive. It's like that overeager, kid in class who always wants to answer every single question, and the rest of the class, and it's like they're always hands up, or the brown noser who's just like always doing too much work, and you're just like, hey man, like take a day off. That's the lats. That's the muscle is just constantly doing way too much work. It's like, dude, I know that you can do it all. Maybe don't, like, maybe let it go for a day. Let somebody else have a try, So here's all the things it can do. So your lats, in addition to, we're not even seeing it listed here, but in addition to that spinal extension, it does shoulder extension. So in the sagittal plane, your lats pull this way, okay? They're gonna pull your arms back into extension. And then in the frontal plane, it's really kind of the most famous one, it does adduction, which is why, when you're doing pull-ups, right? If I go from here and I just take my elbows up, that's what a pull-up is. It's an adducting movement. A chin-up, where I take my arms forward, that's kind of a shoulder extension movement, which is why those two movements are kind of different from one another, shoulder extension versus shoulder adduction. And then the other big thing that it does is it does shoulder internal rotation. So it literally works in all three planes: sagittal here, frontal here, transverse here. And look what happens there. Now suddenly my arms are, my thumbs are facing one another. And I got this like hunchback thing. So I need way more external rotation. But the lats are huge, and we got a lot of muscles that do internal rotation. So we're gonna have to work against this giant muscle here. And strengthen those external rotators in order to fix this.
But when we go like overhand or underhand pull-ups, that hits like different sections of the back, right?
Yeah, oh, very much so, because it's doing like different, there's other synergists involved there as well. Like underhand chin-ups are, like I said, the shoulder extension, right? Which is not the main thing. Your lats are really great at the adduction part. They're good at extension as well. I mean, make no mistake, but like you've got other muscles that can kind of help with that. So when you're doing chin-ups, it's like, oh, you get a little bit more bicep action, a little bit less in the lat, versus like a pull-up or even a wide grip pull-up. That's definitely adduction, right? Both of those tend to be a little bit more lat focused, but it's like, of course your biceps are still working,
Yeah.
So yeah, no, they're definitely still there for sure. But
I just want to confirm with that. That's why, because I've always knew that when you hit like the underhand, I feel it more like in my mid back, but then when I do the overhand or like, the wide, I definitely feel it like all of it, like on the side, like the whole back basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. You can also do a little bit more shoulder retraction in one versus the other. And we'll take a look at in just a little bit. We're going to be looking.
Are you talking about like positioning like on your form on the pull-up, whether you do hollow when you crunch your abs and then you do like the arcing back so you could like engage more of, I don't know.
Yes. So imagine, right? So if you arch your back, right? What you end up doing, you put that arch in the low back as, let's see here, actually, I'll pull that up.
Because I do both. I do hollow to practice my explosive pull-ups, or even like trying to transition like work on the muscle ups. Like that's very beneficial with the hollow.
Yeah.
But this here, yeah, see that? Yeah, so that's the hollow and then that's the archer. Yep.
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? This is spinal extension. So actually, in a way, this works your lat a little bit more. But at the same time, if you look at the angle of pull, you got to also pay attention to where gravity is applying the resistive force, right?
Yeah.
So gravity is pulling straight down this way. So then if you look at like where I'm moving in the set, this is kind of more of like a horizontal retraction in a way. It's more of it's starting to become a row.
Yeah.
Position versus like the other version where you kind of go more forward this way.
Hollow, yeah.
Yep, which becomes like more of a shoulder adduction. So I would argue that this gets your lats more, even though there's some spinal extension here, which is a lat thing.
Right.
Remember, it's not the primary part of the lat, right? It's like something that it does in sort of addition.
Right.
There's no world in which both of these don't work your lats. They absolutely both do. But I would argue that this is a bit more of a lat focused exercise. And this would be a little bit more of like a rhomboid, middle trapezius.
Yeah, because like when you do the hollow, it's kind of like doing like a lat pull down.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this face obviously is working a lot of the lats when in
Yeah.
the position. And I feel like for this one with the arc back, I feel like it's more beneficial if you're trying to like up your weight. Like if you add like weighted plates or something like that,
Hmm.
I think that would be beneficial. Because doing it like this arch, I tried it before, it was kind of more difficult, and I don't know, I feel like
Yeah.
more pain on my shoulders doing it that way.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a little bit of difference. Again, like it's all a variety, right? Just
Yeah.
like I told you guys, I actually don't hate kipping pull-ups. A lot of people are just like, nah, you shouldn't do that. That's not a pull-up. That's like, that's an explosive pull-up.
Yeah.
A squat jump isn't the same as a squat. They're both leg exercises though, you know, like we gotta at least be a little fair, you know, whenever we're describing all this stuff. So that's your lats, that's your latissimus dorsi there. It's all of this section. And that's really the big, you know, shoulder girdle thing we're going to talk about for the upper back. Now, let's go the other way. Let's flip slightly to the other side. So we're going to see this muscle right here. This is your serratus anterior. These are, you know, we were talking about these at one point. These are those little like fish fillet muscles underneath, right? Actually,
Yeah. Oh yeah, the ones that look like ribs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's a
This guy, dude.
But yeah, you can see bodybuilders, right? They got those.
Yeah.
They do. They look like ribs,
Yeah.
which actually makes sense because look at them. They literally just kind of lay directly on top of your ribs.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So here's the thing. They're reaching, you know, all these little serratus muscles are actually coming underneath the scapula and then they grab it, which is why when they pull the scapula into protraction. So this is a scapular protractor. That's really all it does. It just moves the scapula around, right? So it goes, if I had my arms like, you know, pulled back like this, I'm pinching my shoulder blades back into retraction. That's my serratus anterior, that little protracted movement there. So concentrically accelerates scapular protraction. That's all it does. It's one job. So it's you know, at this point in the musculature, it's like it does this and this and this and this and this. It's like this one, it just protracts the scapula, right? Now, here's the thing. This is one of the confusing muscles. And I say that only because this is an example of an underactive muscle, which sometimes surprises people because like, what? No, the muscle that does protraction is underactive. All of us have way too much protraction. Yes, we do. But this is an example of, remember I told you, it's not always the opposite muscle. Sometimes it'll be like a helper muscle that does too much work, and then the main muscle can't do enough work, right? Robin takes over for Batman, and Batman's over there like, this sucks, you know, like, right? Like, yeah, sometimes it's the antagonist agonist, right? In this case, the serratus anterior is supposed to be the agonist for scapular protraction, but it gets inhibited and it can't do its job because a synergist, a helper muscle, starts to take over. That is that pec minor that I mentioned earlier, the one that grabs on the front and pulls. So oftentimes when we have a client with rounded shoulders, we actually need to strengthen the serratus anterior, which always surprises people because again, that you would think that would make your shoulder rounding worse. But what it does is your serratus, if you look at its attachment, which is actually very hard to see, but if you look at like where these are grabbing, right? They're grabbing the bottom. The shoulder blade would be like right about here, right? It's this little triangle, right? It would grab right about here on this downward ridge. Whereas, remember, I'm going to go to the pec minor actually. Remember the pec minor grabs on this front part right here. So your pec minor takes your scapula, both of them protract, but one grabs on top. And when it protracts, it also, see how I've got a downward angle here as well now? I'm kind of exaggerating, but I've got like a downward. Whereas when the serratus contracts, it has an upward angle. It brings it around, but it keeps my shoulder here. And you can even feel that, guys. Take your hand underneath kind of where your lats are, and then protract and tilt up. You'll feel a little squeeze back here, which is actually why working this muscle is so weird. a lot of times you'll do pushes like this. You'll take a dumbbell. I like to call them Mario punches because it looks like Mario hitting a coin. But you're going to take like your arm facing you like this, and you come across your body and up. And that strengthens that serratus anterior right here. Because you're doing protraction when you come across your body forward. But by keeping your arm up like this, you have to upwardly tilt it instead of downwardly tilt it. So I have to spend a little bit of extra time on that one because that's a weird one. That's like on our list when we're memorizing the muscles that are often so tight. You know, we look at the movements. We're like, oh, your knees cave in. That's adduction. All right, we need to stretch your adductors, right? This is an example. It's like, oh, you have protracted shoulders. I actually need to strengthen a protractor muscle, but I need to strengthen the protractor muscle that tilts you in the right direction. So we need to loosen up the pec minor and strengthen the serratus anterior. That's an example of what we call synergistic dominance. The helper muscle, in this case, the pec minor, is inhibiting the prime mover, which is the serratus anterior. By the way, easy to remember, think serrated blade, because that's what it kind of looks like. And it's on the front. But that's, you know, you think like serrated blade is, it's those knives with the ridges, right? And that's kind of what it looks like. It's a whole bunch of like little ridges. So that's how you can kind of memorize that. Actually, and by the way, Jeremy Ethier, the guy that I'm a kind of a big fan of, he's got a great take on how to strengthen your serratus. He's got a good little routine for it.
I watched that guy too. He's cool.
Yeah, I like him. It's funny. He talks in, he's gotten better. When his videos first started, he talked in like a monotone the whole time.
Yeah.
But he's gotten a lot more entertaining. Like it was one of those things where it's like, I like this because like he's giving a very good explanation, but like I show it to people and they're like, but like lately he's been, I mean, like honestly, he's
been on point.
He's so great. I love that guy.
His videos has come a long way for sure.
Yeah. He also has a good blend of like, you know, he gives like the scientific explanation, but then he breaks it down in simpler terms, which is great for me sending videos to my clients, you know?
Yeah, he was, I think he uploaded a recent video about like some splits, different workout splits. And he literally explained from like sets to what exercise to do and everything. I'm just like, this guy going above and beyond in this one.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
He rocks. All right, so that was scapular protraction. Let's look at scapular retraction, right? So we've got our rhomboids. So these are big ones. Your rhomboids, you got major and minor. Your book is just going to put them together. Your NASM book doesn't actually separate them, but you can kind of see there's a little bit of a difference here. See the minor, these little fibers right here. The major is like the big section. So this produces scapular retraction. And then what else does it do? Oh, downward rotation, which we definitely need more of, right? So this is often a underactive, weak muscle. We definitely want to spend our time, you know, doing those rows, right? This is why it's so important to tell your clients to roll their shoulder blades down and back and then give us that rowing action. That's the best way to activate those rhomboids really solidly. So retractors and downward tilters. We've also got the lower trapezius muscle. So now we're going to get into your traps. You got 3 fibers in the trapezius muscles, and I'll pull those up here. 3 different ones. You got the upper, which is your upper trapezius. You got the middle, which is your middle trapezius. And you've got your lower, which is your lower trapezius. And they all pull in slightly different angles. Where the heck is my favorite photo? What? Come on, internet. Upper traps. There it is. Okay. So 3 different sections here. Right, you can see we're going to start by talking about the lower fibers first. So that's down here. It attaches to the scapula. It actually grabs. It doesn't grab the. It doesn't grab the ridge, which is what a lot of people think it does. I think it grabs like the inside like blade there, but no, it actually grabs the spine up here. The spine of the scapula is that, you know, ridge that I talked about. Remember we said it kind of ridges out and then hooks around, right? So that ridge right here, that's the spine. And like I said, it hooks like this, which is why you can see that coming around the back there on this side. So the spine's kind of hidden in this picture back here, but it comes around and then hooks. That's what we're seeing right there. So that is where your lower traps are actually grabbing. They're grabbing the spine of the scapula there, which, you know, it's a huge process. I mean, it's a huge projection from the bone. So it's got a good grip on this. But that also explains why when it pulls, yes, obviously it retracts the shoulder blades back this way, right? It's going to pull it towards, you know, it's going to pull this way. But look at the angle. It's also pulling down, which means, again, it is going to upwardly tilt my scapula, which is exactly what I want. So again, if I got a client with rounded shoulders, what do I need to strengthen? We're starting to see those upward rotate. We're seeing the serratus anterior needs to be strengthened. The rhomboids need to be strengthened. And the lower trapezius need to be strengthened. Those are often our muscles that are underactive in clients with rounded shoulders, because all of these muscles retract and upwardly rotate. They get us to our posture that we want. You want to be upright for the rest of your life, look really good and confident, lower traps all day. So scapular depression is what this does, right? And retract, it doesn't say it here, but it also does very much like a little bit of retraction. So concentrically accelerates scapular depression. So remember, this is scapular elevation. This is scapular depression. And we spend all day on our phones in elevation, which is why this is an underactive muscle. So what's funny is scapular depression is actually stuff where I'm pressing down. So in a weird way, dips, which we often think of as a chest exercise, there's a little bit of activation of the lower trapezius here.
Yeah, I feel it.
Just a little. Yeah, it's not much. I'll say, like, if you're doing dips, you're going to feel it here, you're going to feel it in your triceps, you know, like, make no mistake. But there is a little bit. And one of the other ways you can do it, you could also do it from another angle, right? If you're doing pull-ups and you got your arms up like this, dropping them down, doing that scapular depression, which is where we have what are called scapular pull-ups. And this is something that I always make my client, if I'm doing pull-ups, I always make my client warm up with a couple sets of scapular pull-ups, which looks very small, doesn't seem like a very large exercise, but it is literally the difference.
I love those.
Yep, between this and this. So I'll make them scapularly elevate when they're relaxing. And then all they do is just press down. A little bit of a pinch. Drive the pointy parts of the scapula, right? That just drive this way. And that will activate the lower trapezius. Then we get those middle fibers. I love these slides because like doop, doop, doop. But middle trapezius is right here. It works just like the rhomboids, like see the rhomboids here, right? They're attached to this whole inner ridge. Middle trapezius, not so much. It's grabbing the spine, just like the lower traps did. But it works with the rhomboids to do scapular retraction, right? So the middle fibers, you know, if the lower fibers pull down, the middle fibers pull back. What do you think the upper fibers are going to do? So that's scapular retraction. So again, we need way more scapular retraction in our clients. So what are we strengthening? The rhomboids, lower traps, middle traps. Those are really big ones. And then we also really do like to strengthen that serratus as well. Upper trapezius lives on the top. Grabs a completely different part of the spine of the scapula, but there it is still grabbing. Mir, you were asking earlier, right? The trap comes all the way down and grabs that outer ridge. Yeah. So there we go. There's our upper trapezius living right there. So this one, you will notice, actually has a really large list of things that it does. Again, remember what I just said a minute ago about the lats? The more things a muscle does, the more likely it is to get overactive. This is why so many of us get so tense in our neck. You know, we're just like, ugh.
I was literally using my third gun, and usually I have that overactive muscle on the right side. This is where it always just like it's always tense.
Yep. So let's look at all the things it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, Trap.
Oh man, right? I'm the same way. My left one is likes to, I just like to.
And there's sometimes where you could even like subconsciously like figure it out, like you're like this all of a sudden when you're doing certain, like you're doing something, say you're cooking, whatever, all of a sudden you feel like this is elevated, you're like, no, come back down.
Right? Yeah.
You're like, stay back down.
You also notice, you see how often I do this? This is where it started. This is how my trap got overactive. Is I like
Leaning to the side, huh?
I like to lean to my left.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bad. Every class, this did not start until I started working at Sochi. This, and it's a problem that shouldn't exist anymore because we've been at home for more than a year at this point. But it used to be at the old Reseda location, all three classrooms, we had 3 PFT classrooms. All 3 of them, the TV was on the left side of the room and then my desk would be on the left side of the room. So I'd come in for like 5 minutes, post grades, get up, and then like come back down. And like I got, and this over the course of like a year, 2 years, 3 years, it just got worse and worse. And now I'm like, you know, I look like Igor from Frankenstein. So, all right. So upper traps, like I said, does a lot. Therefore, it's often overactive. So, elevation. So now we're starting to see, oh, so these 3 trap fibers, right? The lower traps, middle traps, upper traps. You know, the upper traps and the lower traps, they are antagonists. Yeah, they're both trap muscles, but they are actually antagonists. You know, this one accelerates scapular elevation. The lower trap was scapular depression. Now, here's the other thing it does. It also does a little bit of cervical extension. It does do a little bit of this. It drives your head back, which is actually kind of a good thing. And then it also does lateral flexion. So the right side contracts me to the right, the left side contracts me to the left, which is why when we are stretching our traps, which we often need to do, what we want to do is we want to take our hand up and over.
I want to try that right now.
That's the stretch. Yeah.
Oh, that feels good.
It might not be bad. Yeah. And then it does one more thing. It also does cervical rotation. They're not telling you what side, but it does ipsilateral rotation. So the right pulls to the right. Yeah, it's like.
Oh, that felt great.
So that's also why sometimes you go here, but if you also look ever so slightly down, you'll also get a little bit of a deeper stretch there. So those are your 3 trap muscles, right? Upper pulls up, lower pulls down, middle pulls back. Retraction, depression, elevation. And then it is in all that next stuff. So we're going to see our trap muscles again tomorrow. We're going to finish up our 5 key kinetic chain checkpoints tomorrow. We're on number 4 today when we get to the cervical spine. So a lot of these muscles are going to be on both lists. You know, your neck and your upper back really kind of interact a lot. So that's why tomorrow actually move. It's another big day, but it moves way faster because like we already talked about this one, we already talked about this one. Yeah. But that's the upper traps.
Are we meeting up in Canvas tomorrow?
Not tomorrow.
Not tomorrow?
Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah, Wednesday's test day / meetup day. All right, let's look at the pecs here. I love the pectoralis major. It's kind of a fun muscle, just like the lats. By the way, I wanted to show you actually. I forgot to earlier. Your lats are so cool. Look at how it comes up underneath the arm. Like a lot of people, you know, one of the reasons it's pulling your arm back into extension, it grabs the arm in the back there. But it does grab it slightly around the edge, which is why it does the internal rotation. And it kind of comes up. So your lat is like coming up underneath your armpit. I always think that's so fun to kind of look at, right? But see how like it comes under the arm and grabs the back, but it kind of honestly it grabs the side more more accurately. It doesn't just grab the back. So that's what's happening there. Well, now we get a really cool muscle here. Your pectoralis. What's that, Mir?
Oh, nothing.
Your pectoralis major is also really cool. Look at this. Look at the twist that it does. So cool, right? So here's the thing about that. So you do have your upper clavicular head. That's what they call this, right? Because it's on your clavicle. And then you get the rest of your pec here. So the clavicular head grabs right here and it comes down, kind of twists. And then the rest of the chest kind of comes up and grabs there. So because of that sort of twisting action, what we're going to see this do here is your pectoralis major is going to do a couple things. It's going to do a little bit of shoulder flexion, a little bit, not famous for this, but again, the clavicular head grabs from here to here. So when it pulls, it's kind of pulling up, right? Which is why it does a little bit of shoulder flexion. So when you're doing like front raises, right, you're actually getting a little bit of pec work, not a ton, right? That's mostly a shoulder exercise, but like it is there to kind of help with that, right? And then the other big thing that it does is horizontal adduction. I'm taking my humerus and I'm adding it horizontally to my middle, right? This is regular adduction, but the transverse adduction is horizontal adduction or horizontal abduction. This is the adduction one. So chest flies, which is really what's happening during like a push-up. It's the same motion as a chest fly, just you happen to have your elbows bent. And then the other thing it does, because you look at the grabbing here, it's grabbing the outside front. So when it pulls inward. It does internal rotation. So it does do not so much a ton of protraction, actually, because it's not attached to the scapula. So it's not designed to move the scapula around. It doesn't do protraction. It does internal rotation, which results in protraction. I can't do one without the other. Which is because of the pec minor, we'll see in a second. But it does the internal rotation, and it does the horizontal adduction, and it does do just a little bit of flexion, just a little. The top fibers do. That's actually why when you're trying to balance out your chest and the way it looks, it is really important to get some different angles there, and make sure that you're doing like incline chest presses in addition to regular chest presses. Do you need decline? Not so much. Like, yeah, there's some bottom fibers here, but honestly, like decline bench presses, it's not the most efficient move. If you're gonna do something like that, you'd be better off doing like dips. But even
That's a keen at lower chest.
Yeah, but like lower chest is a journey that really has no end. It's really hard to fill in the lower chest. That's often like, genetic. Same thing with your middle chest. It's really hard to fill in the middle parts of your chest. This section here, just a lot of it is genetics. I hate
I'm jealous of dudes that have like that nice, curve on the side. I'm just like, damn, how do you develop that?
Yeah, that definition. Yeah. Nope, not me. You can see, I mean, me, look at this. Look at a huge gap there, right? Like that's like, I got no middle chest. Diamond push-ups, all nothing.
Yeah, bro, you gotta work on those narrow push-ups.
So that's your pec major. Now, I actually think the pec major is pretty simple to understand. And it's honestly not often one of our big bad guys. Again, it does do a little bit of internal rotation. That's not great. We have way too much internal rotation. We need less of it. So a lot of times, like, yes, we do want to stretch our pec for sure. But honestly, the real evil devil's muscle today is this guy right here, the pec minor. Pec minor and your latissimus dorsi. Pecs and lats. Those are, man, this muscle gets tight. And look, it does not grab the same spot. Look at this one. It grabs the humerus. This one grabs the scapula. So a lot of people think their pec muscle, their pec major, their bench press muscle, as long as you keep your shoulders retracted, it will not make this worse. But if you're doing this at the end of your chest presses, that can be not so great. That can be that retraction. So your pec minor actually grabs your scapula. Oh my God, come on, there we go. Right here on your coracoid process. Which is that little knob that lives underneath your collarbone. It's that little weird hook that I mentioned earlier, right? And it grabs these three ribs. So this is one of the reasons why when you are stretching your chest, you can always do what a lot of people do, which is like they'll grab like a pole or a wall or something, and those kind of go out like this, and they'll go here. That is horizontal abduction. That's a terrific way to stretch your pec major. But the pec major is often not really our bad guy here, which is why personally I actually like a bent elbow and then I like to elevate ever so slightly. That will upwardly tilt, which is the opposite of downwardly tilting, which is what that protraction movement we see is. So when you're doing your pecs, yeah, you can go straight out like this, and that'll get your pec major, but I would definitely focus a little bit more on the pec minor by just taking it 6 inches higher and then pulling back. And that will retract your scapula a little bit better and get that pec minor stretched out. The big bad is the pec minor. Pec major's tight, make no mistake, but pec minor is often our big bad.
Yeah, I get that one a lot on the right side. So I do exactly what you just said. I go like this.
Go
Helps a
higher.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good choice. Yeah. Let's look at the delts, right? If we're gonna talk about, rounding out those shoulders, we got our deltoid muscles here.
Man, the front
Um,
delt's like the most outwork one for real.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. They go in 3 different directions. So actually, there's a great picture of the pec minor back there, by the way.
Nice.
But you get your anterior deltoid, and it does shoulder flexion, right? It's attached in the front. So when it pulls, right, that's the fibers right here. So shoulder flexion, right? And then it does do that internal rotation as well, which is why, this is kind of challenging because it's like, oh, I need more shoulder flexion in my life. Like we spend so much time in extension, right? Our arms hang down here all day. So clearly we do need more. We need to get better at shoulder flexion, right? So we need to strengthen our anterior delt, but it's also an internal rotator. So it's like, and that's why it's so important to make sure when you are doing like raises, it's actually good to keep your thumbs up. And I know a lot of us do our front, our front raises palms down, right? But neutral position actually allows you to kind of get a little external rotation there.
I actually feel it more on that one, on the neutral one.
Here's the only problem with that is that it also strengthens when your biceps actually kind of start to assist a little bit when you're.
So you gotta have like a little, don't lock out too much. Kind of have it like.
Basically, yeah. You just a slight bend in the elbow.
Yeah, slight bend.
Also, it can help to go just a little bit out to the side. We call that scaption. Instead of just a front raise. I actually am not a big fan of a straight front raise, but I love like a good thumbs up sort of Y.
I do those, but the lateral side.
Well, that's the next one, right? So here's our lateral side, the medial delt. So the middle delt, which is so annoying because it's like, that's very lateral. In fact, that's the most lateral muscle in the body. It's as far outside as you get. It is called the medial delt. I apologize on behalf of the entire community. That confused the crap out of me in school. But yeah, it's called medial because it can also mean middle. And so it is the middle delt, which is what they should call it. But here we are. So shoulder abduction, right? So now we've got sagittal flexion, that's the anterior delt. We've got frontal plane, medial delt, that's abduction. So now we see this little tiny abductor muscle working against our giant freaking lat muscles. This little bacon strip here has to go against this gigantic latissimus dorsi. We can start to understand why we're not so great at abduction, right? And then we get the posterior delt back here, and this is definitely a muscle we almost all of us need to strengthen. And so this does shoulder extension. So it actually goes this way, right? But it also does external rotation. So a lot of people will go and they'll do this. They'll do reverse flies thinking they're getting their posterior delt. And they are getting a little bit. But if you really want to get your posterior delt while doing a reverse fly, we don't just want to go straight out. You kind of want to come back here because that's going to be closer to extension. Or honestly, cable pulls like this are real good. They get your lats a little bit too there. So this is where everything starts getting so muddled,
I can't really perform the flies because of my shoulder. I can't go like too far back. So I would do that, the one you said where you grab the cable. Instead of the cable, I use dumbbells. I use like a bench, like an incline bench.
Sure.
I just kind of like roll it all the way back. Try not to get my back mostly, so try to like focus more on the delts.
Love that.
Yeah.
And then thumbs up, by the way. You can also get a little bit, remember, this is external rotation. So again, like coming here. That's why the YTA is such a popular NASM exercise. They call it combo number 1. Thomas, you'll remember ball combo number 1, which is just doing the same thing on a ball.
Ooh, I'm gonna try that one.
But yeah, combo 1 is you go Y, so you go bent over at the waist, you go Y, and then you do a T, and then you go A. And the A pull is really good for that posterior delt and lower trap. So thumb up, A, T, Y. And just keep your thumbs towards the ceiling the whole time. Easiest way to remember it. But yeah, NASM will call it ball combo 1. So again, take a look here. You can see her. She'll go into a Y. You don't have to do this on a ball, by the way. And then she'll do a T. And she's not going to bring her pinkies up towards the sky. She's going to bring her thumbs up because she wants to do the lower traps, and which she's going to get with that, going back in an A. But she also wants to get the posterior delt, which does better with external rotation. So yeah, Eddie, that's a big one that I would start with. Just body weight, and just
Yeah.
those thumbs up.
Or even like a 5 pound or something, just do a bunch of reps.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
All
gotta look
right.
into that.
Another bad guy muscle here. We were on a good list, right? We had a good guy muscle there with the posterior. Here's another overactive muscle, really overactive muscle. Your teres major. This is not necessarily actually part of your rotator cuff, but it does do shoulder rotation. So it runs from the back of the scapula here on the ridge, and then it grabs your arm. So you got 2 teres muscles. You've got the teres major and you've got the teres minor. The major is a little bit larger than the minor. And they work opposites of each other, right? If we actually look at like, let's see if I can find like a top-down image. Well, okay. Grab that, and then we'll just go teres minor by itself. Oh, that is the minor. God dang it.
What the? What the?
All right, whatever. Use this one. There we go. All right, so here we go. So the teres minor is on the back. The teres major goes under the arm and attaches the front, just like the lats did. So because the teres major goes under the arm and because it grabs the front, it's going to internally rotate. So it does a little bit of shoulder adduction, just a little bit. It can help with this. It can do a little bit of shoulder extension, just a little bit. But what I want you guys to know the teres major for is that it does shoulder internal rotation. This is one of the muscles that we are often working against by trying to get our clients to get better at external rotation. It pulls this way because it's attached in the front. So they kind of like, they kind of both start in the same spot. You can see this one's a little bit higher up, but they're on the same ridge there. But like, this one's like here and this one's like starting a little bit up, but like one grabs in the back, that's the teres minor, therefore it does external rotation, and one grabs in the front, that's the teres major, it does internal rotation. So those are definitely, working against one another. So teres major, again, it does these things as well, but what I want you guys to know it for is it does the shoulder internal rotation. Again, we have way too much internal rotation in our clients, so we're working against that a lot, which means we need to strengthen the minor, which does external rotation, grabs the back, pulls in the back, right? So teres minor concentrically accelerates shoulder external rotation. And this is where we are getting into the rotator cuff. So Eddie, all those muscles you need to strengthen.
Yes.
This is your list right here, except for one of them we got to get rid of. That's the teres minor for sure. So just external rotation. Face pulls.
Oh, I should probably try it that way too. Yeah, because I can't do it this way because my shoulder goes a little bit more lower than this one.
Yeah. So grab a resistance band. I will say be careful with bands because like, really make sure they're a healthy band. Because you never want to like pull towards your face with a rubber band. But if cable machine's even better. If you got a cable machine, cable external rotations, they're great. Face pulls.
Athlete X, he gets a lot of shit for those.
Oh my God, he loves them. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do love them too. Yeah, that guy, I'm so black and white with that guy. Like, I'll be like, I love him one moment, and I'm like, oh, he's the worst. Yeah. So infraspinatus. Infraspinatus. The reason this is called the infraspinatus, break the words down. Infra for inferior. Spinatus would make you think spine, but remember that ridge on the scapula. That's the spine of the scapula. So the infraspinatus is inferior to the spine of the scapula. That's why it's called that. So it accelerates shoulder external rotation as well. So this is another one that we're going to strengthen by doing face pulls, by doing external rotations, thumbs up towards the sky. Yeah, that's going to be both those. So we love the teres minor. We love the infraspinatus. Subscapularis. This one lives in the same spot as the infraspinatus, but it actually runs underneath the scapula. So it's on the other side of it. So like one's on the back of the bone here and one's on the front of the bone. That's why it's underneath the scapula. So that's why we have to show this picture from the front with our kind of ribs in the way there, right? So it's on the same spot, except that this was on the back. So flip to the, if you were to kind of tuck behind, right, get to the other side of the bone, that's where this is, right? So that one grabs the front. This is an internal rotator. This is actually an internal rotator that we do need to strengthen sometimes. It's the only one. But again, the teres major takes over for this guy. Robin taking over for Batman, right? This is the prime mover. So when you do occasionally, and Eddie, I would actually recommend doing some internal rotation, but I would recommend doing this one where you grab here and come this way.
I actually do that with the band. So that's like a rotator cuff exercise kind of.
Yep.
So you're grabbing it like that, and then you extend all the way, hold it for like maybe 2 seconds, come
That's
back down.
minor.
Yeah, so I do it on both sides, and that really tends to help out, especially when I'm warming up.
Yep.
Really good.
Yeah. Now, I'm not saying we need to strengthen all of our internal rotators, but that particular action is pretty good. So that's the good internal rotator. And then we got the supraspinatus here. And this is this muscle that lives up here. So we had the infraspinatus underneath the spine of the scapula. That's the inferior spinatus muscle. Then we got the superior, whoops, I went the wrong way. Superior spinatus muscle up here on the top. Okay, so that lives up here. And that accelerates like a little bit of that abduction. This is actually one that is slightly overactive as well. It's the one rotator cuff muscle that's kind of the bad guy muscle. So it accelerates a little bit of abduction, right? And so when it does this, it's often getting a little bit overactive. If you feel this like when you're doing shoulder raises, if you feel it in your traps or near your traps, that's how you know you're doing this. So just make sure if you're doing abductions, you are depressing the shoulder slightly, and it will keep that from happening. All right, let's look at the biceps. This is actually pretty easy. The arms, very, very simple. Although there are more bicep muscles than you might think. So first one we're gonna see is the biceps brachii. And so this accelerates elbow flexion. And honestly, we could leave it there, but it does one more thing. It also does supination of your radio-ulnar joint. So your biceps brachii, which is kind of the main biceps muscle. And by the way, biceps, 2 fibers, bi for 2, right? One is attached here on the humerus and runs down, and the other one is attached from that coracoid process. It shares an origin with that pec minor. So 2 different fibers there, right? One on the coracoid process and one that runs up over the humerus first, right? So because of that, you can see, and then look at their origins down here. One's grabbing the radius and one's grabbing the ulna. This is why it's so similar to our hamstring muscle. Your biceps and your hamstrings look so similar, right? One does internal rotation, one does external rotation. Well, the biceps are absolutely in charge of elbow flexion, make no mistake. But look at my bicep. You can see it also contracts when I pronate it, when I supinate, not when I pronate. When I pronate, it relaxes. So if you want to get your biceps, that's actually why, you know, reverse curls, I mean, they're okay. I got nothing against a reverse curl if you want to get a little forearm action there. But I wouldn't use it as my primary bicep exercise. We need to be supinated. That's why we got to have our palms towards us, because that's going to give us a bigger contraction. Or you could get an even bigger contraction by doing the whole thing concentrically. So if I started here and supinate as I go through the range of motion, now I'm contracting my bicep in two ways. And that's why dumbbells tend to be the sort of most common choice. Could I do cable curls? Yeah, I think they're great. You know, could I do preacher curls at a bar? Yeah, why not? You know, they're all good. They're just slightly different, you know. Good variety out there. I love to use, you know, sometimes people are like, oh, I only want to ever use the best. Yeah, that's a big mistake that a lot of people make. It's like, I only ever want to use the best exercise for the muscle, you know, and it's like, so I want to do this version. It's like, yeah, but if you've been doing that for a long time, a new training stimulus, bust up your plateau, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes,
I always keep like switching things up every week. Like that's how I know I keep progressing every time.
You know, sometimes it's just fun to take a different drive home.
Yeah. Like I'm not used to doing spider curls, but I love those. And I do them hammered too.
Fair, okay. God, I hate those things. I mean, I like them up here.
Yeah, no, I just don't.
I don't like them. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about. This freaking angle here. So here's the thing about spider curls, I will say. That's actually putting you at a forward angle there. They're really similar to preacher curls. We're going to see two other biceps muscles here in just a second. But before we do, antagonist to the biceps, we got the triceps brachii. So biceps had 2 fibers, triceps have 3 fibers. But you'll notice like some of them actually grab your scapula here, which is why you can actually get a little bit more tricep work by doing just a little bit of shoulder extension. This little pulsing action here can actually burn out your triceps sometimes, which is why you'll see women in Pilates classes, they'll do this one. And some people think that exercise looks silly, but anatomically, it's a great tricep exercise. I know that we all think of it as like lots of elbow movement, but no, there is a little bit of tricep work there. I'll never forget when I worked at BLR, we would do these trainer workouts, and the Pilates lady made all of us do like a class because it was so fun. It was like the trainers would train the other trainers, so we would just try to wreck our coworkers. You know, it was like a fun. Like I would make everybody do just the hardest workout I could come up with, and Katina made all of us with little like 3-pound weights. You know, all of these guys were all in there. We're like trying to be, you know, tough and macho and bullcrap. And she's these little 3-pound weights. I was like, oh, I'm dying. Like, why? Like a little 3-pound weight, and I'm just like crying. But it can be tough, you know. I'm not used to working my triceps that way. So elbow extension and a little bit of shoulder extension. That's what it's known for. So this is actually also one of the reasons why you want to have a slight bend over when you're doing your triceps. That slight bend allows you to have shoulder extension. So that's why we do that. It's not just the downward. I don't hate us, but I will say also by changing the angle up, you can do like a French press or a skull crusher, right? There is a difference between the long head and the short head on your triceps. If you're going at a downward angle, that's going to be the short head down here near the elbow. And if you're up like this, that's going to be the long head up here. So depending on if you guys are thinking of like trying to fill in your triceps and make them look, you know, the way you want them to, definitely get a blend of those 2 different styles. And that's going to help.
What about like on the cable rope when you like have your thumbs like that, aren't you hitting the long hit too? Would you do that?
What's that? Oh, like a cable,
Cable, so you're like,
so you can pull to the side.
yeah, like that.
A little bit, a little
little bit on
bit.
the
But
back.
again, like now you're doing internal rotation. You'd be better off with like a little bit of extension. So sometimes even like a very big rope, so you can really go wide, super
Way
wide
back.
to the side. You'll see those sometimes those ropes that are like
Yeah, they're huge. Yeah, I seen them.
so that allows that. When you go to the side like this, you start to get like into a little bit of internal. You can get a little chest action there. But me personally, that's not really my go-to. You can do it, you know.
Yeah. No, I do all kinds of tricep exercises. I hate everything. So just to give
Next
a little
one.
bit more boot, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Next one, we don't often think of it as a bicep muscle, but it kind of is. This is your brachioradialis. This runs along this ridge right here and crosses over the elbow joint far down on your forearm. So you'll notice it's on the outside portion. So if you're trying to fill in that, like Popeye muscle, friggin' seriously, not like showing an actual picture of Popeye. I mean, Popeye. Come on, internet. Yeah, that nonsense. That's how you would fill that in. You actually, this is why, and it is still a bicep muscle. So earlier I said the reverse curls, right? That's one of the ways to get it. So palms down. You're really going to get a little bit of that forearm muscle going there. And then the last one is the brachialis. And that one is just starting about halfway. This is similar to your biceps femoris, short head, right? Starts in the middle of the arm and then runs down right here. This is one where, okay, well, that only does elbow flexion. So the pronation, supination doesn't matter, right? So this is where preacher curls or spider curls, like we mentioned earlier, that's really much more your brachialis. Biceps brachii, and then brachialis, and then brachioradialis, because it's doing the radial muscle. And then you also get brachioradialis, by the way. One thing that I should mention actually before I look at it, all of these are elbow flexion, but one thing the brachioradialis does that isn't really mentioned super well here is it does do a little bit of the pronation instead of supination. This is where, gripping also can really help with that. So like if you are like, doing a farmer's carry, right? You're kind of, neutral instead of external. That can be really good. So you'll sometimes see people do farmer's carries like this because it gives them the retraction, which honestly, we need more retraction. So I'd say that's actually pretty great. But if you are trying to use a farmer's carry for your forearms, you'll actually be better off over here. Or actually doing the barbell farmer's carry. Barbell, which is so freaking hard. I find this to be nearly impossible.
Oh shit.
It's so hard to balance, but that is getting, the forearms a little bit more. This is actually my favorite farmer's carry.
The hex bar.
Yeah, I prefer a hex bar. I just got one a couple weeks ago. Love it.
Oh really?
Yeah,
there's one like next to there's other guys parking right next to me, and it's just there laying there. I'm just like, I'm about to steal that shit. Like if that guy doesn't move that thing.
Right?
And it gets on the way too, because I'm trying to like, go to my spot and I have to like go over it. And I'm like, dude, I'm about to take that shit with me.
Just tell him to give it to you.
Yeah,
Buy
because
it.
he has it there. Yeah,
use
I
it.
might
Not
when
for
I see
50
him,
bucks, dog. He'll sell it to you for 50 bucks.
Yeah.
I'll be down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's nice too. It's a nice one.
Okay, tell him 60 bucks then.
Tip included.
Right, there we go. So one muscle I want to mention, two muscles today that I didn't put on the list, but they are going to be on tomorrow's lesson. They're neck muscles. You do have what's called your levator scapula. So I want you to know for scapular elevation there, literally levator elevates the scapula. But that's really going to be a lot of neck stuff tomorrow. So it really goes much better in that lesson. And then the same thing is true of your sternocleidomastoid. It's right, this big neck muscle. and that does a little bit of neck stuff as well. The only reason we're mentioning it here is because remember your scapula, when it moves, or if your neck is moving, right, is going to your scapula, which is the girdle, right, the shoulder girdle, will affect your shoulder joint. So if your levator scapula is over tight, again, you can't raise your arms up overhead. Right? Sternocleidomastoid is really tight. You can't raise your arms overhead. So there's some muddying there, right? There's definitely a relationship between neck and shoulder. All right.
Is that
question?
That head thing with the chain, the one that you wrap around your head and you move your neck around all everywhere?
Mm-hmm.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never really goofed around with it too much, just because I've worked in PT clinics and I've kind of goofed around with it. But when I work in a regular gym, so I don't know, it's like a little self-conscious thing, I guess. It's kind of goofy looking.
Yeah.
I never bring it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that that retraction stuff actually is actually very good.
Okay.
But there's sort of some other versions we'll talk about tomorrow that are a little better.
Yeah, okay. All right.
That are a little bit more socially acceptable. They just look a little normal. I wish that's the worst part of my personality, but there is the part of me where I'm like, this is goofy looking.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way, dude. A lot of people are like that.
Yeah. All right, so our movements, if we're retooling how we do this, right? We've got scapular protraction and we got scapular retraction, right? Rounding the shoulder around is protraction, pulling it back is retraction. We've got downward rotation and upward rotation. We have got elevation versus depression. And then one thing that, that's right, I remember how we broke this down. So we'll go through those here real quick. And then one thing that's not being mentioned is we've also got anterior tilting versus posterior tilting. We have way too much of that anterior tilt, which is the protracting and downward rotation. But so for the protraction, the big one, we need to know both of these. It's your pec minor and your serratus anterior. The serratus is supposed to be leading the show here, right? The serratus muscles, which are grabbing the whole ridge here and then all the ribs, that's supposed to be the main one. It would pull it around the body directly. But the pec minor is the one that we often end up using too much. And that is the one that causes that downward tilt, right? The serratus would pull it directly forward, but the pec minor does this. Bad guy, good guy. Then we got the scapular retraction. Why is this not going in the same order? Is my scapular retraction missing? Oh no, I think my PowerPoint might be broken. Okay, well, scapular retraction, right? Going the other way, that's the middle trapezius and the rhomboids. This is always kind of actually, there we go. This is the one I like. So you can see here, your trapezius muscles are the ones that you see that are superficial, right? And then your rhomboids are kind of living underneath that. But the rhomboids are retractors, and the middle trapezius fibers are about this section here, are also retractors. So protractors, pec minor and serratus, retractors, middle trapezius and rhomboids. You've also got your upward rotation, swinging the scapula out this way. That's going to be the middle, lower, and serratus anterior. So guess what? We need that upward rotation way, way more, right? Versus the downward rotation, that's your pec minor. And it does say rhomboids here, but it should be noted that it's your minor rhomboids, those top couple fibers. So again, we see way too much of that downward rotation, right? That tilt. Versus like what we need, which is the upward rotation, the good tilt, right? It's not just about drawing your shoulders back. It's also about, this. So get them tilted back up. Stand tall. Scapular elevation, straight upward movement. That's the levator scapula. Like I mentioned, we'll see that one tomorrow. And then the upper traps are a big one. And then those, just the top couple fibers of the rhomboids there. But definitely some tight muscles here, you know. Those are the muscles we were stretching out a little bit earlier. And then scapular depression, that's the lower, oh God. That's the lower, God dang, it's doing the yellow thing. Lower trapezius, pec minor actually, right? And that's your dipping muscles, right? But really, I don't really, you know, again, like the dip is hard on the shoulders. This is why that scapular pull up, just that little tiny pull, is going to get those lower traps going. So that's the scapula stuff. That's all of our shoulder girdle movements. Let's look at the shoulder joint movements, which is going to be flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, internal and external rotation, right? So shoulder abduction. Oh, actually, sorry. And there we go. So abduction, adduction, flexion, extension, horizontal adduction, horizontal abduction, and then internal rotation, external rotation. So a lot of movements there. For the flexion, right, on the front, that's your anterior delt and your pec major, right? Particularly the upper pec major, right? Remember I mentioned those the clavicular head is attached to the clavicle. So that's the shoulder flexion. And then we got the shoulder extension. That is going to definitely be your lats. That's the big one. A little bit of teres major there as well, and a little bit of the lower pec fibers. This, by the way, is why sometimes, if you've ever wondered why you've done pull-ups and felt a little sore in your pecs the next day, it's because like you were doing probably pull-ups instead of, I'm sorry, you were probably doing chin-ups instead of pull-ups. Chin-ups, that little bit of extension, it's like the lower portion of your pec. Then we've got the abduction going this way. Big one here is the medial delt, but a little bit of the supraspinatus as well, and a little bit of pec major, nothing to write home about. But really, guys, middle delt. Shoulder adduction, lat city, right? So latissimus dorsi is going to pull this down. A little bit of teres major there as well. And again, a little bit of that lower pectoralis is kind of helping. But really the latissimus, that's the big one. And again, that's that giant muscle working against that poor little anterior or medial delt, you know, giant. David versus Goliath. Then we got the internal rotation versus the external rotation. Again, our lats has showed up like every freaking list here, right? It was a shoulder extensor, it was an adductor, and now it's also an internal rotator. That's why the lats get so tight. So internal rotation, right? And then teres major, internal rotation. Pec major, maybe a little, right? But yeah, all of those muscles there are internally rotating versus the external rotators, which are your actual rotator cuff. We need that infraspinatus and teres minor muscles, right? And we need that posterior deltoid muscle. So again, this is why we love, and why Jeff Cavalier, Athlete X, that's why they love face pulls so much, right? Right here. Pull it back because that's infraspinatus and teres minor and posterior delt. For horizontal abduction, that's the reverse fly. That's going to be posterior delt a little, but you guys heard my talk on that. It doesn't do as much as we give it credit for. A little bit of medial delt, you know, both those are kind of working together. But the big one here, infraspinatus and teres minor, right? Pulling that straight back. Horizontal adduction, pecs, totally the pecs, right? Going this way, pecs. A little bit of anterior delt there as well. You guys will know, you know, when you're doing chest flies or chest presses, you fill it in your deltoid a little. But the big one, that's your pec major. Then we got the elbow stuff here. We got elbow flexion versus elbow extension. We've got supination versus pronation. So flexion, extension, pronation is palm down, supination, give me soup, right? So the biceps curl, that's going to be all three of those bicep muscles, right? The brachii, the brachialis, the brachioradialis. So brachii, which also does, we see it on the supination list as well, right? As well as the brachioradialis, right? So that's doing, the supinated curls where you're doing the rotation. And then the brachialis is that preacher curl. You can also do like drag curls where you go this way, like arm back. And that's a really good way to get your brachialis as well.
What about like the hammer curls? You didn't
Hammer
bring that
curl?
up?
That's like
Yeah.
neutral. That's like brachioradialis
Break you. Okay.
because it's the forearm a little.
I see. I see.
Not great for the big, like if you want like a peak, hammer
Oh, like
curls
the
aren't
peak.
so great for that. But it is a very functional movement. I like them all. I really do. They're all good. And then elbow extension, those are your triceps. There is actually one more here, by the way, this little Anconius muscle that we never talk about. It's this little guy. Kind of similar to your pectineus in the hip. Is like a little tiny one, but that's, we never talk about that. But there's the triceps. Those three different heads there. So elbow extension. It is all one muscle, but again, there's the two different angles, right? There's this one and this one. Both are going to be really good to get those different heads. And then we got the pronation versus supination. We literally have our what are called pronator muscles. They're these little tiny ones here. I didn't talk about them today because they're kind of wrist things, but they're gonna pull it down this way, and then you get your supinator, which is that biceps brachii up here. Wrist stuff. It's at the end of the PowerPoint. We're not doing it. That's why the yellow stuff is here. It's all very, very, very optional. But yeah, a lot of muscles in the wrist. The wrist is a pain, guys. But yeah, that 85 slides today.
That's a lot.
I know. You guys
And then you're gonna do that again later.
That is true. That is true.
I have to ask you something though.
Yeah.
So if I want to work on like my upper back, right?
Mhm.
And you said when you're doing rows to push down and pull back on your scapula, right?
Down and back, right? So what I mean by that is like when I say down, this is another example of like me simply, what trainers do, right? We kind of simplify our language sometimes. What I mean actually is that upward tilt. So like I don't tell my clients to just pull their shoulders back. I tell them to roll their shoulders back.
Roll. Okay.
Because
I feel that. I feel like when I roll it back, when it finally can't roll back anymore, that's where it is, right?
Because if you draw, like sometimes this is one thing I like that Jeff Cavalier does, where he
The drawings,
drawings. I do love that.
Yeah. That's smart.
But yeah, like if this, I don't want this tilting this way. I want it this way. If I can get a little this way, it's even better. Because
sometimes I sit on like a rowing machine, or even I'll do like a bent row, and I'll just start pulling it towards my body. I won't try to like tense up that muscle, but it's better to tense it up, eh?
That's actually one of the reasons why on a bent over row, we actually don't go straight like 90 degrees.
45.
We do a slight, like kind of keep the weight back. We kind of go this way. It's easier to keep the retraction. And I love like a good like reverse grip row. And you're getting that external rotational.
You're getting a deeper pull, huh? You're getting your elbows farther.
That's actually what I'm doing. That's what I've been doing for the last 8 weeks. It's reverse grip.
Okay.
Yeah, love those. I think they're great.
Okay. So I'm gonna go try that today.
Do it. Absolutely.
And if I
Barbell
break
or dumbbell, I like them both.
If I break one of the machines at my gym, I'm just gonna blame it on Eddie.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I actually got push day today, so I'm actually gonna be working on weighted like dips and push-ups. I haven't done that in like the past month. Just because I want to be more explosive.
Man, weighted dips are tough. I can't. That kills me. I mean, that's the thing. All Eddie, you and we are like all calisthenics kill me. It's too lanky.
You know what it is with you? Yeah, no, it's because you have long arms, dude.
Yeah.
You have long arms. And you have to use a tip rack that's really tall.
And people would say it's like, oh, you're good at basketball. No, I'm not. Yep. I'm too gullible to be good at basketball. People like you give me one like little fake juke and I'm like, and then they, you literally just have to go and then shoot. Yeah, it's bad. Any other questions though today, guys? Anything that was like weird rotator cuff stuff maybe?
No, not really. Well, I do have a question about like what kind of specialist should I go look into that? Because I have a guy who does like he went to school there too. He does all like the cupping and stuff like that. So that helps to loosen up a lot of things to get better range of motion. But then it just comes back.
Yeah, honestly, best advice I can give you, if you've got the insurance for it, sports medicine doctor.
Sports medicine doctors.
I mean, you know what? I want you to try a workout. So like get on the bench press.
Right.
Have like some 10-pound dumbbells and like you're laying on the bench press flat, right?
Right.
Military press those dumbbells when you're looking up. Does that make sense to you?
What the hell? So like just laying down and then do it like this, but like
slow. And like, just do like a shoulder press with the dumbbell. Mm-hmm. Maybe that'll help loosen it up because you're gonna be upside down.
That is, we call that combo number 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, try that, bro.
Spot, man. That's good advice right here.
Let me see.
Yeah.
Oh,
that looks like a good. Let's go. With a strawberry shake.
So this is doing it on a ball, but it's the same thing.
I see.
It does go.
Okay, but try it facing up though.
Yeah, facing up.
Yeah, okay. Facing up because it's gonna pull your shoulder back.
That's true.
It'll pull it back naturally for you. If you want to work against gravity, though, concentrically, you got to face down.
Try this too, then. Yeah, try this too.
If you're trying to stretch, it's a great stretch to be face up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Strengthen it by being face down. But yeah, good instincts, man. That's great.
I'm gonna try that.
Yeah, see, I don't know all the words, but I've been had this body for 30 years now. So yeah.
What about you, Thomas? Any questions?
No questions.
On that. Well, all right, fellas, let's kill the recording.